Hello, I'm Natasha Vitamore. Welcome to H Academy Roundtable. Our topic is Hit Reset, to reinvigorate, redesign, restructure, and to address the culture of the future. Our guests are panelist Dr. Rachel Armstrong, architect, professor, and TED Fellow, John Lobell, professor at Pratt Institute, historian of architecture and culture, and Gary Abramson, founder of Moonburn Creatives, designer, artist. I look forward to this discussion.
We pay attention to what we give back. I think that the title of your session about regeneration, I think, is really key. And I think that the investments that we make in the worlds that we enable is really the value that we invest in the futures that we want. And I think that's what I mean by the generosity and humility, because when we invest our time, our resources, our attention in bringing positive things into the world, then I genuinely think that those things come back. I mean, it means staying with the trouble of the difficulties of making that happen, but I think not getting distracted by negativity that's all around it.
I remember in the late 50s, C.P. Snow's book, The Two Cultures, and it's a half a century later remains a classic. I would be the only person from the arts at the conference, and I feel quite capable of holding my own, talking about quantum physics or, whatever, but I don't see this mix. And I think if we're going to ask questions about culture, we turn to Oswald Spengler, Joseph Campbell, John David Ebert. I never hear those names come up at tech conferences. They're two different worlds. So my argument would be we need a little more interconnections between the quote unquote two cultures.
I think that modern culture really gravitates towards, I guess it's the easy sell in the context of Maslow's hierarchy. It really targets our sense of survival, our sense of belonging, and not our sense of self-fulfillment and true self-realization. So two things will be really important. One is that at a social level, there need to be people such as who are creating a vision that literally just transcends the base politics, the base conflicts that are going on here, and shows a future that is so vast and so incredible that it draws us like moths to a flame, at least some of us. And secondarily, there needs to be a cultural shift towards healing individuals even at a personal psychological level, towards peeling back some of the trauma so that people feel more secure in their lives, more secure in themselves. And you cannot project authenticity into the world if you cannot feel worthy and authentic in being yourself. And that's where it starts. It starts within us.
I think there's been too much emphasis. I really like what you said about the self-improvement, because in some ways, to me, it feels like a contraction rather than an expansion. You mentioned symbiosis, which is suggesting that by acknowledging our power, our kind of vital essence, even if we haven't fully articulated that yet, even if we spend our whole lives discovering what that power, what that agency might be, being able to be bold enough to experiment, finding those potencies that help us shape the kinds of cultures we want to participate in. And I don't just mean that there is, that there isn't hostility and there isn't negativity. But I really do think of this idea of staying with the trouble, Haraway's term. I like it because a good experience of the world is difficult. It requires us to be critical of our own position in relationship to things, and requires us to adjust and build as needed. So that requires a great deal of intelligence and self-awareness. And I think a lot of people aren't prepared to put that kind of work in. So that self-improvement is the start, as you've just said. But I think really as we go through the world, that process of worlding is really about an expansion of ourselves, so that we don't just have to be a static conception, that we can be quite a dynamic entity in many different spaces with many different challenges, and still be a coherent entity and have a flexible culture around that. So I think there's something about an ecosystem of culture, and maybe cultures, that there isn't just a dominant culture, that we participate in many, but that is part of that, beyond the self-improvement and a kind of lifelong learning and being with.
I would look at something different. I like what Gary said about, and Elon Musk is our poster boy at the moment, but big thinking. I mean, I was sitting in front of the TV when they landed on the moon, and I told my students, your students will be doing gravity-free experiments in space during winter break. Boy, was I wrong. The whole thing just got shut down. And for what? There are a bunch of social programs that exacerbated social problems. So I think we need vision. When I'm annoyed with my students, I blame the school. In architecture and planning, we've been teaching students how to stop things. Some things need to be stopped, but maybe some things need to be done. So the book, The Greatest Generation, talked about the generation that survived the Depression and won World War II. Well, they also built regulated economy, the safety net, Social Security, unemployment insurance, the interstate highway system, the Modern Research University, and they went to the moon. I asked my students, what do you aspire to do? They say, get a job in a good firm. Well, I think we should not accept those students, except the ones who say they want to change the world.
This is important, because I think that the realm of the expanded imaginary in higher education, as John's just pointed out, is not encouraged. In fact, we've turned our students into apprentices, and they are meeting, for example, building regulations. They learn how to make a building or a space in a very particular way. There are legal frameworks, there are contractual considerations that they have to play into. And so the big questions about what a discipline, whether that's architecture, whether that's design, or whether it's science, could be, are not the ones that are being held in the classroom today. And the students themselves are actually asking what they need in order to pass an exam, rather than how does the world become great through the things that I do and think, and what are the what extra lessons or tools or experiences can I acquire whilst I'm at university that let me out of this paradigm paralysis that we seem to be incarcerated in. And I think that's what's gone along with that, though, is a kind of cynicism for big ideas, and I think that can be incredibly pernicious. I think what we do need to do, particularly at a time where we need significant change, is to give our students the confidence to keep on experiment, asking big questions, and we should be holding them up whilst they do that, and learn how to go into those, let's call them dangerous spaces if they're always expecting a kind of positive outcome. But how do we actually support them through what you've brought into the question about the regenerative? Can we get regenerative learning so that we put ourselves into a situation and learn something from it, even if it was what we expected in the first place. And I think that exploration is really kind of hammered by current curricula. It's something I try to bring into the classrooms, but everybody within higher education right now is constrained by the deliverables and the finances of the system.
Well, I mean, going back to the culture that we want to build, the biggest challenge is it's basically the balance. So culture itself, the way that we interact with it is literally pure economics, which is the way that we value, assign value. A lot of people associate economics only with money, but it's really the assignment of value. And obviously in a multicultural world with lots of different worldviews, it becomes very challenging to agree on a particular direction, to have unity and have harmony. And especially in the context of our base instincts, where many of us are at a level where we fear for survival and security on a daily basis. So, what we don't want in the culture ultimately are the aspects that are self-destructive. We don't want to have the great filter. The culture has to be geared towards creating a future that we are in, and more specifically that you are in, because you are wonderful. And ultimately also because everything's becoming digitized, our lives are basically being defined by algorithms and dictated by algorithms. We need to create algorithms within not only social media, but within our virtual realities, within our physical realities that are actually healing and regenerative. And ironically, one of the great models for that is DNA, which is healing and regenerative. And there's so much opportunity and knowledge and wealth just locked up in what's already encoded in DNA, that if we can use that as a foundation for our culture and create virtual algorithms that unite us, unify us, bring us towards, more of a Star Trek world rather than a Blade Runner world, then we stand a chance of making it through the great filter and actually venturing out into the stars, becoming transhumans, having full body prosthetics, as you've been talking about for years, Natasha, becoming cybernetic, digital constructs, new multiple levels of consciousness. This is where we're headed. And the question of surviving to get there is a matter of figuring out the equation or the algorithm in our culture that will allow us to thrive and grow rather than destroy ourselves.
Well, we walk around thinking we're in the world. We're a biological creature in a physical world of space-time, matter, and causality. In traditional India, this world's an illusion. There's a transcendent oneness that one should aspire to. In China, one should put oneself in harmony with the way of all things. In the Middle East, the world was created by a creator who left instructions. You don't wing it on your own. They're all there in a book. In Greece, Prometheus defies the gods and brings fire and the sciences to humans. In the West, the Knights of the Round Table are about to go forth on a quest, and each entered a forest in a place that was different and there was no path or way, believing it would be a disgrace to follow the path of another. So I think first we have to decide who we are. And if we say we're material creatures that evolved by a series of accidents evolutionarily in a physical space, we're missing the potential of the larger stories about us. And we find that in our literature and in our art. Something happened 250 years ago in a little corner of Europe. It's called the Enlightenment. It led to a 1,000-fold increase in prosperity, and for the first time, the liberation of every individual person. And the reason for that was turning loose the individual to pursue their vision, to become who they could be, and to do their thing. And it's under widespread attack today, and it's very fragile. It could go away, and we could go back to the thousands of years of wonderful history, but without freedom and prosperity. And I think that's the danger we face.
Does respond to both Gary and John, which is we don't want inflexibility and we don't want fear, particularly of change, because they become very destructive forces within these kind of fragile, explorative, highly still negotiable relationships. And I would include the Enlightenment in that fragility, because of its relationship with, let's say, certain kinds of, certain, let's say, power structures get associated with that. So I think all of it is about a balance, and I certainly wouldn't be eliminating the great advances that the Enlightenment has brought, but being aware that every culture is fragile, because there's a point where maybe the world, maybe people, maybe all kinds of different contexts change, and everything needs updating. Everything needs an ongoing criticality. And so I think that we are experiencing many, let's say, counterculture belief systems that are unpicking what we would have 20, 25 years ago thought of as being truths. And there's been a kind of relativity that's been unleashed, which in itself is not necessarily a bad thing if we share the same values and we ballpark live in the same world. But when we live in very different universes, the disparities and the connections and the possibility of communication can be kind of overwhelmingly perplexing. The big lesson I learned from TED was the power of the story. And coming from academia, that was a shock. And one of the things that we have noticed, particularly in the last, 25 years at least, is the media has been playing the role of the storyteller most largely. And therefore, the stories that we tell each other are highly politicized. We no longer have these fantastic, grim fairy tales, which have dark and light sides and tell us about kind of morality and uncertainty and help us navigate difficult things, maybe sometimes using, metaphor and fantasy. But at the same time, these time-old stories are incredibly compelling. And I think that one of the things that we could learn to do as a community is to tell incredible stories. And the second part I would say with that is by leading by example. And Natasha, you are a prime example of a woman who is in this domain, kind of like, throughout all the times that I've had an interest in this field of the future of human, you have been there as a leading voice, no matter how difficult things have been. So, and your consistency in that, I think, is incredibly compelling. So I think it's possible, but I don't think it's easy. So I think that there are things that we can do, and maybe it takes us longer, and maybe it is more like cathedral thinking and a legacy that we leave, rather than a change we can make in the here and now.
More art and literature.
We really have gotten away from stories so much. I mean, we're in a reality TV world. We're waiting to see the train wreck. And just psychologically, the way our brains are tuned, if it's evening and you see a silhouette of an animal or a person, you assume that it's approaching you. We are so geared towards the threat. And As a result, in the interest of market share, news and media and social media is very targeted towards our low-hanging fruit, which is our desire to be safe and our need to feel safe. So, one thing that stories have really helped with, especially the hero's journey, is that it's shown us that we can become larger than we are. We can go into the scary forest and learn lessons and bring it back to the tribe, and then elevate the whole tribe. And I think one thing that's really profound about our relationship with the future and where we're headed, and I say this as someone who is an advocate for extreme life extension and cryonics, so many people are just terrified of the future. They really are worried not only about where the world is headed, but I think at a deep emotional level, they don't see how they can survive it. They feel uncomfortable with becoming merged with machines, with cybernetics. What's going to happen? Living on other worlds, the challenges of that. How are we dealing with resource depletion in our own world? Are we going to be able to overcome that? Are we actually going to make it into a world of abundance, where we have cultural abundance, where we actually stop warring with each other, and where we can create an environment without and within that actually nurtures us and allows us to have a better future?
Life used to be more difficult. I mean, my father went to City College, he went to Columbia Law, he worked in a top position in the government. They didn't have electricity when he was a kid. He could hang on the back of a bus to get from the Bronx to the Metropolitan Museum. That's how he saw art. And people complain when all the world's art is on their laptop. Give me a break.
I think it's critical, it's this discussion about our culture. I think rather than try to say things are wrong and disagreeing, what we need to do is focus more light on the things that are going right and on that information, which is very hard to get through to people, because I think someone mentioned this earlier. Media is invested, and more than ever, and in this country, probably the worst in the world, on negativity, on the story that grabs the headlines that's very negative. Good things happen bit by bit every day, and they're accumulation of progress over time. That's not a very exciting story to say, plane landed today, nobody died. Another plane landed, nobody died. No, one plane that crashes, that gets all the headlines, even though maybe the first one in 10 years. And if you actually look at the numbers on those things, you see that things are getting better in many ways. So let's not get so much negativity and arguing about things that actually are not major problems, so we can focus on building things and improving things. Also, just very briefly, if I could just say, I noticed that some of the panelists discussants were talking about engineering or designing a culture. I think actually maybe that may just be an unfortunate choice of words. I think maybe Rachel will agree with this. Maybe we should talk about more of growing a culture and facilitating it and fertilizing a culture rather than designing it, because I think that gets us into some trouble. Thank you.
I think that new agents are rewriting the story of life, and we can't ignore them. And our sense of self-identification or sense of identification has been vastly expanded. And I think that this will help us reach escape velocity from the gravitational pull of our industrially centered knowledge frameworks and lead us towards a richer, more vibrant and lively future.
Yeah, we have students in my school working with NASA on Mars projects. And what I would urge is, what does it mean? In other words, the students are great at problem solving, making the thing efficient. And I like to ask, this is the biggest event in the history of the human race. We're becoming a multi-planet species. How are you celebrating that in your architecture? So I think that's what we should call for.
I would urge people to embrace true humility, let go of everything that you think you know, and really look at the world with first principles thinking and develop an understanding of what is
Regenerative, spontaneous, and symbiotic cultures inspire, elicit, provoke, teach, challenge, and unmask hidden truths, all seeded by experience and emotion. They form the stories that we tell.